She didn't come to Wyoming looking for love. She came because every door behind her had been locked by people who were supposed to protect her. Her father sold her future to pay a debt. The man she was supposed to marry talked about her like she was furniture, and she had nowhere left to go except west. The stage stopped at the wrong town. The job she crossed half a country for didn't exist anymore. The only door still open belonged to a grieving stranger who hadn't spoken a woman's name in 3 years. He let her sleep in the barn. What neither of them knew yet was that she was carrying a tin box at the bottom of her bag. 8 months of quietly collected documents prepared alone, in the dark, for the fight she knew was coming. She didn't need rescuing. She needed someone to stand beside her. And when she finally looked at him and said the words she believed were true, "You deserve better than me," what he said back will stay with you long after this story ends. This channel is built for the people who believe the best stories come from the American West, tales of dust and courage, of love that grows slowly between broken people, of mothers and strangers, and ordinary human kindness that holds the world together. If that sounds like your kind of story, you are exactly where you belong. This story carries something worth keeping. It is about what happens when two people who have been told in very different ways that they don't deserve anything good finally stop believing that. Sarah spent 26 years being treated like property. Tom spent 3 years punishing himself for surviving. The moment they both set that down was the moment everything changed. What this story offers you is simple and real. You do not need permission to choose something better. You only need to decide. If this story found you at the right moment, leave a comment and tell me which part hit closest to home. Share it with someone who is carrying something heavy right now. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. Every person who stays and listens is the reason this fire keeps burning.
The wagon stopped. The wheels quit turning. The horses blew out long clouds of breath into the cold afternoon air, and Sarah Whitcomb sat very still and looked out the small window at what was supposed to be her new beginning. It was not Cheyenne. It was not anywhere near Cheyenne. 3 buildings, a horse trough, dust the color of old rust blowing sideways in the wind, the way dust blows in places where it has nowhere particular to go. The driver, an older man named Silas, who had managed maybe 40 words in 6 hours, climbed down from the box and pulled her bag from the luggage compartment with the indifferent efficiency of a man who had done this 10,000 times and cared about none of them. "End of the line, Miss Garfield Station." That was all. No apology, no explanation. He turned the wagon around and drove back the way they had come, and Sarah stood on the dirt road with her brown leather case at her feet and the wind finding every gap in her coat. She unfolded the letter she had read so many times the paper had gone soft as cloth. The instructions from Mrs. Hartwell's domestic placement agency in Boston were clear enough. Take the Laramie stage to Cheyenne, then north to Clearwater Creek. A tutoring position with the Harrington family, $12 placed in advance, arrangements confirmed. Clearwater Creek was 40 miles north. The last stage of the week had left that morning at 7. Sarah sat down on the boarding house step, opened her small ledger book, and wrote 4 lines. Money remaining, $3.40. Distance to Clearwater Creek, 40 miles. Transportation available, none. Shelter tonight, unknown. She underlined the word unknown and put a question mark beside it. Another woman might have cried. Sarah Whitcomb had used up her tears somewhere around western Ohio and had not found them particularly useful since. Inside the station building, there was an elderly woman named Mabel who was stone-deaf and kind and helpful in almost no practical way. After several rounds of gestures and speaking louder than necessary, Mabel produced an envelope from a desk drawer. Sarah's name on the outside in neat handwriting. 6 weeks of postmarks on the outside. The letter inside was from Margaret Holden, postmistress at Clearwater Creek. Brief, polite, and final. The Harrington family had relocated to Denver. The position no longer existed. Mrs. Hartwell's agency had been notified to cancel the arrangement. Mrs. Hartwell had not passed that cancellation along to Sarah. She had kept the $12 and apparently hoped for the best. Sarah folded the letter, put it in her pocket, sat still for 30 seconds, and then asked Mabel if there was anyone nearby with a room or a barn loft available for the night. Mabel pointed west and said something Sarah only half heard. Wheeler's place. Good man. Quiet. Then one more word, clearly. Sad. She drew a rough map on a scrap of paper. 2 miles west, past a wooden bridge, first house on the left. She handed it over with a piece of dried cornbread. The way you give someone something when you don't know what else to offer. Sarah took the cornbread, said thank you, and stepped back outside. The sky to the north was changing in a way she didn't recognize but felt was important. Cloud coming down fast and blue-gray, the kind that people who grew up in Wyoming would have immediately started moving for shelter under, and people who grew up in Boston had never been taught to read. She picked up her bag and started walking. 2 miles with a leather case into the wind on a road that had never been level for 1 inch of its length. She counted steps so she wouldn't think about anything else. 100 steps. Set the bag down. Look at the sky. Pick the bag up. Walk on. The ranch came into view around a bend, and the first thing she noticed was the fence. Straight posts, even spacing, well maintained in the way of someone who wasn't doing it to impress anyone. They were doing it because it was worth doing correctly. Low log house, smoke from the chimney. A barn, larger than the house itself. She knocked. The man who opened the door was not what any book she had read would have described as handsome. Tall, brown hair that needed cutting, 3 days of beard on his jaw. A flannel shirt with grease at the cuffs. He was holding a barn door latch he'd been in the middle of repairing. He looked at her the way a man looks at a problem that has just arrived on his property. Not with warmth, with assessment. "Are you Tom Wheeler?" Sarah asked. "I am. My name is Sarah Whitcomb. I arrived at Garfield Station this afternoon. I had a position arranged in Clearwater Creek that no longer exists. There is a storm coming, and I have nowhere to go tonight. I am not asking for charity. I can work for a meal and somewhere dry to sleep. I will leave first thing tomorrow." Tom looked at her face. Then he looked past her at the sky. "That storm hits in 2 hours," he said. "You won't make it back to the station." "I know. There's a loft in the barn, dry. I'll bring blankets." "Thank you." He did not open the door wider, did not invite her inside. He turned back into the house to get the barn key, and Sarah stood on the porch and understood that she had not been turned away, and that sometimes that had to be enough. The storm came exactly when he predicted. Snow and wind arriving together, the kind Wyoming people called the shutdown because afterward no one was going anywhere for several days. Tom brought a bowl of cornmeal mush and a piece of bread. She sat on a wooden stool in the lamplight. He sat at the far end of the barn on a crate, not eating, continuing to work on the latch in the quiet. Cattle shifting at the back, wind pressing at the walls. She ate, set the bowl down. He stood up, took the bowl, and walked into the dark. She climbed to the loft. Dry straw, 2 thick wool blankets, not comfortable by any measure she had used before. Warmer than any night in the 3 weeks she had spent crossing half the country by rail and stagecoach. She lay back and looked at the dark ceiling and listened to the storm outside. She did not know the man's name. She had eaten his food and used his blankets, and she did not know what to call him. That was the last thing she thought before she fell asleep. The strange part was this. It was the first night in months she slept without listening for a knock at the door. She woke to the sound of a shovel scraping ice. 5 in the morning, still dark. Through a gap in the barn wall, she could see Tom clearing a path from the house to the barn. Alone, in the dark, like the morning had a task that required doing and waiting for daylight would be wasting it. 18 inches of snow, temperature well below 0. The road back toward Anytown was closed for at least 2 more days. Sarah climbed down and offered to help. Tom handed her a shovel without a word and pointed at the section he wanted cleared. Her arms ached after 10 minutes. Her breath came in white clouds. Her fingers went numb through her thin gloves. He worked at twice her pace without slowing down or commenting. She noticed something only later, when she thought about it. He had taken the harder corner. He had left her the easier stretch. When they finished, he looked at the sky the way a man reads a language he has known his whole life. Road stays closed at least 3 more days. You can use the main house. I'll stay in the barn. I don't want to take your room. You're not taking it. I'm offering. She understood. This was not warmth. This was practicality. He was not going to be responsible for a Boston woman's health in a barn in a Wyoming freeze. She accepted it in that same spirit. She spent the morning alone in his house, and she did not go through his belongings. She sat in the room and looked, the way she had always looked at rooms, the skill formed over 20 years of sitting in places where no one remembered she was there. Tom Wheeler's house looked like a house where a man had stopped partway through something, not from laziness, from losing the reason to go on. A dining table large enough for 4, one man living there, a bookshelf holding a veterinary guide for stock farmers, the Prairie Farmer's Almanac from 1879, and a Bible with a spine worn from reading the same passage too many times. Behind the front door, a coat hook. On it, a woman's shawl in pale blue cashmere, the kind no one wore to do farm work, dusty, not taken down. Near the outside door, a pair of children's shoes, brown, small, the size for a child of 3 or 4, placed neatly with the toes pointing toward the door, as if waiting for someone small to come home. On the mantel, a photograph placed face down. 2 tin cups on the table, not dirty, not forgotten. Set there deliberately, side by side, first thing in the morning. Sarah sat at the table, made coffee from what she found in the kitchen cabinet, and opened her ledger book. She wrote one line, Day 2, snowed in, 3 more days minimum. Then she added below it, he still sets 2 cups. She underlined that second line and wrote nothing more. In the afternoon, she was sweeping the floor when a board near the cook stove shifted under her weight and lifted slightly. In the hollow beneath it sat a small wooden box, dark with age, with a brass latch. It had been there long enough that the dust on top of it was thicker than the dust around it. Sarah looked at the box for 10 seconds. Then she placed the board back down exactly as it had been and finished sweeping. When Tom came back that evening, she was reading the veterinary guide, not by preference, but because it was thick and available. She did not look up right away. The floorboard near the stove is loose, she said. You should nail it down before someone steps through. Tom stopped in the middle of the room. Silence that lasted long enough to carry meaning. Thank you, he said. I'll see to it. He did not see to it that night. They both knew it. That was the first important thing they did not say to each other. And by not saying it, they understood each other better than most people manage with a month of ordinary conversation. That night the fire was going, and Tom was mending a leather saddlebag, and Sarah was writing a letter to her younger brother James, not certain she could send it from here. The silence between them ran for nearly 40 minutes, not uncomfortable. Just the silence of 2 people who had quietly agreed not to perform anything for each other. Then Tom spoke, not looking at her, voice low and even, the voice of a man reading from something he had been carrying in his head a long time. Her name was Carolyn. Our daughter was Mary. Cholera. Summer of 1878. Both of them. 2 weeks apart. He paused. 3 years ago, come July. I haven't had anyone in this house since. Sarah set her pen down. She did not look at him. She looked at the fire. I'm sorry, she said. Most people say that. I know. I mean it differently. She paused. It's the kind of loss that doesn't fit anywhere. Not in conversation, not in prayer, not in years. It just stays. He stopped working on the saddlebag. For the first time since she had arrived, he looked at her. Actually looked. You sound like you know something about that, he said. I know about carrying things that don't have a proper place. A short silence between them. I'm also sorry I'm here when you don't want anyone to be, she said. Her voice was not apologetic, just honest. I know this house still belongs to them in many ways. I'll try not to disturb that. Tom looked at her for a long moment, not with emotion in the romantic sense, with recognition. The look of a man who has just heard the right thing said after 3 years of hearing everything else. The floorboard, he said finally. I didn't open it. I know. I won't. I know that too. He went back to the saddlebag. She went back to the letter. Outside, the snow was still falling. The fire made the only sound in the room for a long time. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Tom Wheeler slept without dreaming about the grave under the birch tree behind the house. He did not know why. He did not remember it in the morning, but the body tends to know things before the mind is ready to admit them. Day 4. The road was passable again. Food in the house for maybe 2 more days. Tom said at breakfast, "I have to go to town, flour, salt, lamp oil." "I'll come," Sarah said. "I need to send a letter and ask about the next stage north." No argument. Half an hour later, the wagon was moving down the frozen road, the two of them sitting with a comfortable distance between them that neither had arranged and neither examined. It was the first time they had been close together in a small space for any length of time. And like most first things in this story, it started not with something large, but with something as ordinary as shared breath, turning to white clouds in the same cold air. "Where did you come from?" Sarah asked. "Before Wyoming." "Pennsylvania. Ohio before that." "Why Wyoming?" He was quiet long enough that she understood there was more in the answer than he was going to say. "Caroline wanted land of our own. There wasn't affordable land left in Ohio. And she said the sky here was wider." "Was she right?" "About the sky, yes." A pause. "I didn't understand what she meant at the time." "Do you now?" "Now I understand it. Just understanding it alone isn't the same." That came out and he went quiet, the way a man goes quiet when he has said something he didn't plan to. Sarah did not pick it up or dig at it. She looked ahead at the road and let it go. That, too, is a form of respect. The town of Harlow Creek held about 200 people, one main street, a white church at the northern end, and the Wyoming Territorial Bank on the corner, built in solid brick, the only solid brick in town, which was exactly how Randolph Cage liked things. It was Sunday. The morning service had just ended, and people were coming out into the cold street, and Tom's wagon pulling up with a woman beside him was the most interesting thing to happen in Harlow Creek in several weeks. Reverend Elias Marsh was standing outside the church shaking hands. He was 67 years old with a deeply lined face and the patient eyes of a man who had heard too many stories to judge any new one quickly. He moved toward Tom's wagon without hurrying. "Tom, it's been a while." He offered his hand to Sarah. "Elias Marsh." "Sarah Whitcomb, good to meet you, Reverend." He looked at her the way careful men look at situations that aren't fully explained yet. Gertie Hollis came out of the general store before they reached it. She was 52, broad-shouldered, widowed, and possessed of an ability to assess a stranger from hat to boot in the time it took to blink. "Tom Wheeler. And who is this now?" She did the assessment. "Boston, am I right? I'd know that cloth anywhere." "You are, ma'am." "Come inside, still cold out here." Out. Randolph Cage stood in front of the bank in a 3-piece vest that had no business being worn in a Wyoming town, a tall hat, and the particular stillness of a man accustomed to other people waiting for him to speak first. He nodded at Tom in the way of a man who holds paper on what another man owes. His eyes moved to Sarah for exactly 1 calculating second. "Wheeler, payment quarter's up next month." "I know." "Good." Cage went back inside. Calvin Reeves was near the edge of the gathered crowd, a man of 44 with a Union veteran's economy of movement and 2 missing fingers on his left hand. He gave Tom a nod that carried more than most handshakes. Looked at Sarah. "Ma'am?" 1 word. Then a look at Tom with a question in it. Tom gave a small shake of his head. Calvin understood. Then there was Nora Reeves, Calvin's daughter, 16 years old, with red hair and eyes that had not yet learned the art of pretending. She pushed through the crowd and asked 3 questions without stopping. "Where are you from? I really like your hat. How long are you staying?" Sarah looked at this girl with her uncomplicated directness, and for the first time since she had arrived in Wyoming, she actually smiled. Inside Gertie's store, the business of buying flour and salt was conducted alongside the real business, which was Gertie finding out everything she could. "So what brings you out here, Sarah? Tom never takes on visitors." Before Sarah could form a word, Tom said it, fast, without thinking. The way a man reaches for the nearest available thing when he needs something quickly. She's my cousin, mother's side, from Boston. She's here for a visit. The store went quiet for a beat. Gertie looked at Sarah, looked at Tom, looked at Sarah again. Cousin, she repeated. Not quite a question. Well then, good. Tom could use some company. She turned back to the scale. Sarah stood there with her face composed and understood exactly what had just happened. If she told the truth right now, the truth would stick to her in ways that would make everything harder. A woman alone, no position, living in an unmarried man's house, no proper explanation. The lie was wrong. The truth would be worse. But she was an accomplice now. Not because she agreed, because she said nothing. Reverend Marsh had been standing near enough to hear it. He said nothing either. But she caught his eyes for a moment, and they held neither judgment nor surprise. Just knowledge. The eyes of a man who knew when the full truth was not the right instrument for a particular moment. On the road back, 2 miles passed without a word. Then Sarah said, "Cousin?" Tom didn't answer right away. "It was the only word that came," he said finally. "And when they ask why you've never mentioned me before, I'll think of something." Tom. She used his name. Her voice was not angry, just serious. "I spent 2 years running from a story someone else wrote for me. I don't want to start a new one the same way." He guided the horse around a frozen rut. One fence post went past, then another. "What would you have me say? A stranger woman showed up at my door in a blizzard and I let her stay. In Harlow Creek, that means one of 2 things. Neither of them is good for you." She understood he was right, not morally right, right about how the world actually worked in 1881. "All right," she said. "We keep the lie, but I want you to know I don't like it. Neither do I." The ranch came into view ahead. Smoke from the chimney, because Tom had left the fire going before they left. The habit of a man who had lived alone long enough to always prepare for something to come back to. Sarah looked at that smoke and felt something she did not have a name for. Not happiness, not quite peace, just warm. Into the 2nd week. No one had mentioned Sarah leaving. Not to avoid the subject, it was more that neither of them knew what to say about it, and when Wyoming people are uncertain, they tend to work rather than talk. The task for the day was smoking meat. Tom had butchered 2 steers the day before. Today meant hanging the cuts, preparing the cure, and keeping the fire at the right temperature for 8 hours. It needed 2 sets of hands. The smokehouse was 8 feet by 8 feet, low ceiling, no windows. Smoke from apple and cherry wood chips sitting heavy and sweet in the air. Temperature near 100 degrees when the fire was up. Space for 2 people, just barely. Tom cut and hung the meat on iron hooks. Sarah mixed the curing blend, salt and black pepper and dried sage and bay leaves, in the ratios her grandmother had taught her. An Irish woman from New Hampshire, who did this every autumn until her hands wouldn't let her anymore. "Where did you learn that?" Tom asked, not particularly surprised, just noting it. "My grandmother," Sarah said. "She always said meat doesn't need a lot of salt. Salt only preserves it. Herbs give it a reason to exist." He didn't comment on that. But he let her continue her way without adjusting anything. When he passed her an iron hook, their hands were close in the small space. Her hands were considerably smaller than his. She wasn't wearing gloves because she wanted to feel the spice blend. He noticed and shifted how he handed things over without saying anything. Not romantic, just attentive. After 4 hours of work, they sat outside the smokehouse door on upturned crates to rest. Coffee poured from the small pot Sarah had thought to bring. The sun angling toward the mountains. The meat needed 4 more hours. Sarah had been holding a question since the 2nd day. She asked it now. "Why did you let me stay? You could have put me on the road back to the station the morning after the storm." Tom looked at his coffee. The silence ran long enough that she thought he was not going to answer. "Because when you knocked on my door, you didn't look scared," he said. "I was actually quite scared." "I know. But you didn't let it come out as begging. You stood straight and said exactly what you needed, nothing more. And when I opened the door, you looked at me." He paused. "Not over my shoulder for someone better. Not at the ground waiting for me to decide. You looked directly at me. And that mattered? For 3 years, people have looked at me the way you look at someone who has lost something. Carefully, gently, steering around certain topics. You didn't look at me that way. You looked at me like a man you needed to solve a problem with." He was quiet a moment. I wanted to remember what that felt like. Having someone in the house who wasn't trying to feel sorry for me. It was the first human lesson of the story, not about romance, about respect. Sometimes what a grieving person needs most is not someone to pity them. It is someone who treats them like they are still whole. "You told me your truth," Sarah said after a while. "I should tell you mine." She told it, not with a shaking voice or wet eyes, with the level delivery of a woman reading from a list she had made her peace with. Her father had signed a marriage contract with a man named Harold Hayes when she was 24 years old. Hayes was 52, a wool merchant, and the arrangement was made to clear a $4,000 business debt. Her father did not ask her. He announced it as settled fact. Hayes was not cruel in the way that involved violence. He was cruel in the way of a man who considered a woman something he had purchased. In their first meeting, he discussed her with her father while she sat in the same room. "She will do nicely. Quiet. Doesn't talk too much. The way you evaluate an animal at market." Her brother-in-law, her sister's husband, was not openly unpleasant, but there are certain kinds of attention a woman learns to recognize before she has words for it. She told her sister. Her sister chose not to believe her. When Sarah refused to sign the marriage agreement, Hayes told people in their social circle that she was not quite right, the coded phrase of the era covering things that had no polite name. After that, no family would hire her as a tutor, no position opened anywhere. So she spent 8 months collecting documents, teaching herself property law from second-hand books, and saving every coin she could manage. One September morning, she picked up her bag and left. "I didn't come to Wyoming for romance," she said. "I came because there was no other direction. And because I had read that in the Western Territories women could own land, sign contracts, exist as legal persons. In Boston, I was not a person. I was property." Tom listened to all of it without interrupting. He did not say that was wrong or I'm sorry or any of the things people say when they are uncomfortable and do not know what else to offer. He asked, after a moment, "Did you believe the position was real?" "I hoped it was, but I had prepared for the case where there was nothing at the end of the road. And if I hadn't opened the door, I had a small knife in my coat pocket and enough money to work a week in a rented barn." Tom looked at her, not with pity, not with surprise, with something closer to respect, the kind you give someone who has been standing on their own feet a long time without making a production of it. They went back inside to check the fire. The applewood smoke sat sweet and thick. The meat was curing right. Neither of them said anything more about what had been shared. There are things that once spoken don't need commentary. They only need to have been heard. Tom stood and restacked the wood chips. "I'll bring another quilt out," he said, "and smokehouse work makes the cabin colder when you stop moving." "Thank you." He went to the house, came back with a quilt and a piece of cornbread. "Eat something. You haven't had anything since noon." She took it. "You notice more than I expected." "I've lived alone a long time. People learn to notice when there's nobody to talk to." He turned toward the house, stopped at the door. "And you don't have to keep calling me Mr. Wheeler," he said. "My name's Tom." "Thank you, Tom." He nodded, went inside. That was the chapter in which nothing large happened and everything changed. No promises, no declarations. Just two people who had been carrying things alone for too long, setting those things down in the same room. And finding out that setting something down does not mean losing it. It just means you are not carrying it alone anymore. Early November. Sarah had been on the Wheeler Ranch for 3 weeks. Nobody asked when she was leaving. She had quietly stopped asking herself. The trouble did not arrive in a single day. It came every morning, a little more, adding up. First morning, Tom checked his oldest cow, a 9-year-old named Bessie. She wasn't eating. He looked her over without saying anything. But Sarah noticed how he stood back up afterward, slower than usual, with more weight on him. Day 3. 2 more calves refusing feed. Tom called it the slow sickness, a name Wyoming stockmen used for something that had no official diagnosis, something that came in dry years when the summer burned too long and the winter hay carried whatever the damaged soil had to give. Day 5. 8 cattle showing symptoms out of 80 head. That was enough to ruin a man if it spread. A letter from the bank arrived the same week. Cage's handwriting polite and direct. Payment due by December, $340. The bank would be reviewing the mortgage terms if full payment was not received on schedule. Tom read it, folded it, put it in a desk drawer, said nothing to Sarah. She noticed he was drinking more coffee, going out to the barn at 2 in the morning, not finishing his supper. Small signs, the signs of a person holding too much alone. On day 6, Sarah was reading the veterinary guide, not because it was the only thing available this time, but because she had been looking for something specific. She found it. Page 147. Tom. He was outside at the water trough. He looked up. This book describes exactly what your cattle are showing. It is copper deficiency. It happens when drought conditions leave too much sulfur in the soil, and the winter hay carries that sulfur, and the sulfur blocks the cattle from absorbing copper. That is why they stop eating. Their bodies cannot process what they are taking in. Tom put down his tools and walked over. He looked at the page. How do you treat it? Direct copper supplementation is the clean solution, but the faster approach is herbal. My grandmother used dried nettle and fresh alfalfa ground together for cattle in winter in New Hampshire. Same principle. Do you have dried nettle anywhere? Left corner of the barn. I dry it in summer for tea. That is enough for 3 days. We will need more after that. Then he asked the question she had been waiting for without knowing she was waiting for it. Why didn't you tell me you knew this? You've been here 3 weeks. You've been reading that book. Sarah set the book down. Her voice was even, not defensive, just honest. Because no one ever asked. Not in 26 years. She looked at him. When I talked about what I knew at home, people looked at me the way they look at a child who is speaking at the wrong table. I learned to wait until someone needed it enough to listen. He was quiet long enough for that to settle. Then he said, I'm listening. What do we do? They worked for 3 days straight. Day 1. Dried nettle ground with the last of the alfalfa mixed into a supplement feed. All 8 sick cattle given their first doses. No change yet. That was expected. Day 2. Tom rode to Calvin Reeves to ask for fresh alfalfa. Calvin gave him a full bundle without many questions and said one thing, which Sarah heard through the window. Nora says the woman staying with Tom knows herbs. Good. This land needs people who know more than one way. Sarah heard that from inside and said nothing. But it went somewhere and stayed there. It was the first genuine compliment she had received as an adult from someone with no reason to give it. Not family, not someone who needed something from her. From the quietest man in the county, who spoke so rarely that when he did, it meant something. Evening of day 2. One cow was not improving. Tom stood at the barn door looking in at the dark. I think I need to put her down, he said, before it spreads. Give me 1 more morning, Sarah said. Double the herb dose at first light. If there's no change by noon, you decide. If you're wrong? If I am wrong, you lose 1 sick cow instead of killing her early. The risk is the same either way. But I don't think I'm wrong. He looked at her for a long moment. All right. Day 3. That cow ate in the morning, not fully recovered, but eating. 2 of the calves were standing normally. 2 of the 8 still needed more time. In real life, solutions are rarely complete. But 6 out of 8 was enough. Enough to avoid ruin. Enough to keep going. That night they sat on the porch, cold but no wind. The Wyoming sky thick with stars in a way that people who grew up in cities never quite believe. You saved the herd, Tom said. We saved the herd. No, his voice was not being polite. It was being accurate. I would have lost them. I've been through 2 winters not knowing what the real problem was. You found it in a book in 3 days. The book was on your shelf. Having the book is not the same as knowing how to use it. Sarah did not push back, did not deflect or say it was nothing or just luck. She accepted the acknowledgement with a quiet nod. That is also something a person has to learn, how to receive thanks without undoing it. Tom stood to go inside. He paused, picked up the blanket from the chair beside her, the one she always used in the evenings, and laid it across her shoulders, said nothing, went inside. She sat where she was and put her hand on the edge of the blanket. She had never had anyone do that. Not her mother, not her sister, not anyone. That uncomplicated kind of noticing, seeing that someone is cold, bringing a blanket, walking away without needing anything back for it. That was all, and that was quite a lot. The third trip to town had settled into routine the way unplanned things sometimes do. They went together because it made the most sense, and neither of them examined that too carefully. Gertie handed Sarah a letter when they came into the store. Well-traveled envelope, multiple postmarks, her brother James's handwriting on the front. Sarah put it in her coat pocket, did not open it in front of Tom. On the way back, he asked, "Letter from home?" "From my brother." "Good news?" "I don't know yet." He did not ask anything more. That night, after Tom had gone to sleep, she opened it at the kitchen table by candlelight. James had written in his particular way, worried and pressured at the same time, the voice of a young man trying to speak for himself from inside someone else's house. "Father says if you come back before Christmas, things can be worked out. Mr. Hayes is still willing. Mother has been weaker. The doctor says this winter will be hard. I am not pressing you, but I miss you, and I am worried." Then at the bottom, in smaller letters added after the rest, "There is one other thing. Aunt Eleanor passed away last month. She left you $1,200 in her will. The attorney says you have 90 days to come back to Boston and sign the paperwork or the money goes to the family estate. $1,200. Enough to buy a small piece of land. Enough to live 3 years without working for wages. Enough to start over somewhere new without depending on anyone." Sarah sat with the letter until the candle burned down. She kept it in her coat pocket for 3 days. The work continued. The cattle were recovering. The new grain store plans were being sketched out. But Tom noticed. He was not naturally a reader of faces, having been alone too long for that kind of attentiveness. But he read rhythm, the rhythm of days. And Sarah had stopped asking about tomorrow. She used to ask every evening about the next day's work, what needed to happen, what to prepare for. For 3 days she had not asked about tomorrow at all. On the third evening, he was splitting wood out back, not because the pile was low, because he needed something to do with his hands. She came outside and stood nearby. "Something's wrong," he said. "You haven't been the same since town." "I had news from home." "Good news?" "I don't know yet." He sank the axe into a stump and looked at her. "You don't have to tell me." "I know. But you don't have to decide alone either." She looked at him. This was the first time he had offered that particular thing. Not practical help, not materials or labor. The offer to share the weight of a decision. She didn't quite know what to do with it. "Give me 1 more day," she said. "All right." He pulled the axe free and kept working. That night she sat at the kitchen table and let her thoughts go where they needed to go. If she went back to Boston, the $1,200, a chance to see her mother before it was too late. James needing someone steadier than their father had ever been. A familiar life, narrower, more constrained, but known. People would stop asking her every day what she wanted. They would simply tell her. Hayes? No, never. If she went back, it would be to sign the papers and sit beside her mother and then leave again for somewhere else. Oregon, maybe. Somewhere no one knew her name. If she stayed, this ranch was not hers. Tom had made no promises. He had never said he wanted her here, only that he had not wanted her to go. That was not the same as an invitation, and by Christmas the cousin story would crack completely, but This was the first time in 26 years she had woken up without someone telling her what the day was supposed to be. No one arranged her hours or reminded her what to wear or decided who she was allowed to be. And this was the first time she knew her own worth. Not because anyone told her so, but because 6 cattle were eating normally because of something she had known all along that no one had ever thought to ask about. That difference was not small. The next day, Tom was in the barn repairing a saddle, hands moving through the familiar work without needing to look. She stood a few feet away and watched him for a moment before she spoke. "Tom, if I told you I had to leave, what would you say?" He stopped, did not look at her right away. The sound of a horse shifting in its stall, wind at the barn wall, a long silence. "I'd say I understood," he said. "I'd help you pack. I'd take you to the train myself." She nodded, turned to go, 3 steps, 4 steps. "But I wouldn't want you to go." She stopped. "I haven't said it because I don't have the right. You came here by accident. You've stayed by your own choice every single morning. I don't want you to stay because I asked. If you stay, I want it to be because you decided." A pause. "But you asked, so now you know." Sarah stood there with her back to him. And what she did next was not something she had planned. It came from somewhere deeper, from 3 weeks of watching a man keep 2 cups on a table and never say a word about it, from a blanket laid across her shoulders without expectation, from the recognition of what this situation was costing him. She turned back around, looked directly at him. "Tom, the woman who knocked on your door in that blizzard does not belong in your story the way you might think. She has nothing to offer you but a collection of problems that aren't yours. Your grain store, your cattle, your banknote. The people looking for her will keep coming, and every time they come, it puts something of yours at risk." She paused. "You've already lost too much. You deserve better than me." Tom Wheeler froze. Not from surprise, from the recognition that those words had just landed on an exact spot inside him. Not about her, but about himself. For 3 years he had held the quiet belief that he had no right to anything good, that continuing to live after Caroline and Mary was a kind of debt he owed to grief. And here was this woman standing in his barn telling him he deserved more while she was the one paying a price. He looked at her for 5 full seconds. Then he said it with the voice of a man who has just made a decision and does not intend to revisit it. "Sarah Whitcomb, I have spent 3 years convincing myself I had no right to anything more, that staying with the grief was some kind of loyalty or penance, and I couldn't even name what I thought it was." He set the saddle down. "And then you knocked on my door in the middle of a blizzard and looked at me like a man who could still be useful for something. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't feel like I was just waiting for something to end. So don't tell me what I deserve. I know what I deserve. And I choose you." It was the first time in the story that Sarah cried. Not loudly, just tears, quiet and unhidden, on a face that did not try to stop them. Not because she had been chosen, because this was the first time in her life someone had chosen her after hearing every reason not to. 5 days after the barn conversation, nothing had changed outwardly. No formal declaration, no rearrangement of rooms. But something had shifted the way a door shifts when someone finally oils the hinge that has been dry for years. Nora Reeves was in the yard learning to identify herbs from Sarah when she looked down the main road. Somebody's coming. A rider on a good horse, not a working animal. Gray vest clean despite the distance traveled. Hat without road dust, the kind of man who didn't do outdoor labor. Tom was at the fence line. He straightened up and watched. The rider pulled up at the gate with a practiced smile built for first impressions. "Good morning. Looking for a Mr. Thomas Wheeler." "You found him. My name is Montgomery Pierce. I represent several families in the East in legal and family matters. I'm looking for a young woman named Sarah Whitcomb. I understand she may be somewhere in this area." Tom did not glance toward the house window where Sarah was watching from behind the curtain. "Who sent you?" he asked. "Her family. They are concerned about her welfare." A man travels all the way from wherever you started for someone his client is merely concerned about. Denver. It is my work, Mr. Wheeler. I mean no harm. She can decide for herself whether she wants to speak with you. Sarah came around from the barn side, the long way. She had told Nora to stay in the barn. Pierce looked at her with something that was not hostility. More complicated than that. A man who genuinely believed he was doing the right thing. Sarah, I am glad you are well. I have come on behalf of your father. My father has access to a telegraph office. You know he doesn't like the telegraph. That is very convenient for him. Pierce kept his composure. You have had your time away. You have proven you can manage. No one denies that. But your family needs you. Your mother is not well, and Mr. Hayes is still— Don't, Pierce stopped. That name does not get spoken here. He changed approach. Voice softer, the voice of someone who genuinely believed he was helping. You are living in an unmarried man's house without any formal arrangement. Whatever your intentions, people talk. And what people say affects what? Her voice was level as a table in a level room. My reputation in a city I left? My father's arrangements that I was never a willing part of? Tell me exactly what it affects, Mr. Pierce. Tom spoke for the first time, not cutting in, just stating fact. She is over 21. Under Wyoming territorial law, she has full legal standing to determine her own residence. Pierce looked at Tom with recalculated attention. You know the territorial law. I know what I need to know. Sarah took one step forward. She was not aggressive, she was clear. Tell my father I am no longer his to give. She said each piece of it as its own sentence. Tell Mr. Hayes I was never his to forgive because I did nothing that required his forgiveness. I did not run from my duty. I ran from the assumption that I had no right to have a duty of my own. And tell yourself, Mr. Pierce, that I am not a stray animal to be retrieved. Pierce looked at her for 10 full seconds. The practiced smile had been gone for a while, not because he was angry, because he was seeing her clearly for the first time and understanding that the woman he had been sent to collect and the woman standing in front of him were not the same thing. I will report back to Mr. Whitcomb, he said. Thank you. He moved to mount his horse, stopped, turned toward Tom. This detail matters. He turned toward Tom, not Sarah, because in the world he understood the real conversation happened between men. You are a good man, Mr. Wheeler. I can see that. But you should know the Whitcomb family has connections in Denver and Cheyenne. People who have ways of moving things along that don't require a courthouse. He let that settle. A man with a small ranch, an outstanding banknote, no real protection beyond a wooden fence. I would hate to see misfortune find a hard-working man through no fault of his own. He rode out. The dust rose behind his horse and drifted in the afternoon light. Tom and Sarah stood side by side. Nora came quietly out of the barn. He's a bad man, Nora said. Not exactly, Sarah said. He is a man who believes he is right. That is more dangerous. A man who knows he is wrong has limits. A man who believes he is right has none. Tom looked at Sarah. He'll come back, with more behind him. I know. Are you frightened? She considered it honestly. Yes, but not in the way that makes me want to run. In the way that tells me I need to be ready. You were already preparing for this before you left Boston, weren't you? I knew someone would come eventually. I just didn't know when. She paused. And I didn't know if I would have anyone standing with me when they did. A short silence. Our home, Tom said quietly. The way you say something that surprised you by being true. 2 words he had not used together in that particular way before. Not my home. Not your home. Ours. Nora looked from one face to the other, and had the good sense to keep her thoughts to herself. 5 days after Pierce rode out. The tension was not from any obvious threat. It was from waiting for one. Tom checked the rifle and the revolver the morning after Pierce left. Not for war, just the practical preparation of a man living far from any help. Calvin Reeves appeared the same morning, standing quietly at the gate. Tom went out. They talked for 10 minutes. When Tom came back inside, he said simply, "Calvin's watching the road in. If he sees strangers, Nora will ride over." Reverend Marsh stopped by one afternoon. Before he left, he said quietly to Tom, "I don't know what's coming, but this community sees what is worth seeing. It always has." Tom did not ask what he meant. Marsh did not explain. That was how Wyoming people said the things that mattered most. The evenings of waiting were their own particular thing. Tom and Sarah sat by the fire after supper, past the point of needing a reason to sit together. She was knitting with yarn Gertie had given her. He was reading the almanac, occasionally reading a line aloud. She wrote the notable ones in her ledger. It was the most ordinary thing in the world. It was exactly what they were protecting. Night 5, 2 in the morning. The smell of smoke came before any sound. Tom was awake in seconds. A man who has lived alone long enough sleeps light because there is no one else to hear things. He went to the window. The grain store on the east side was burning, fire already into the roof. Not an accident. There was no lamp in there, no stove, no reason for it. "Sarah, up, fire." She was dressed in 10 seconds, the habit of someone who had learned somewhere in the past several months to be ready before she needed to be. Outside, 15 below zero. The grain store was burning the way a Wyoming wind wants things to burn, fast and complete. Tom said, "The grain store is gone. Save the barn." Winds carrying toward it. Buckets from the well breaking through the ice on the surface to get to the water. Each bucket thrown against the barn wall to keep the wood wet. Tom worked without stopping. Sarah matched his pace, not behind him, beside him. The horses inside the barn were panicking. Sarah went in. She found the oldest mare, Daisy, 12 years old, and the calmest of them, and held her by the neck and talked into her ear, low and steady the way you speak to something frightened. The mare stilled. The others followed her. While Sarah held the horses, Tom kept throwing water. The grain store collapsed at the 20-minute mark. The barn did not catch. A burning board came off the grain store roof on the wind and hit Sarah across the shoulder as she was leading the last horse clear. She went down on one knee. Sharp pain, sudden. Tom saw it, ran over, put his hands on her. "Are you hurt?" "My shoulder. It's not serious. Keep going, Tom." "Sarah, keep going." He looked at her for 2 full seconds. Then he stood up and did. Not because he didn't care, because he trusted her to know herself, and the barn wall still needed water. There are ways of caring for each other that don't have a pretty name. That was one of them. Dawn came gray and cold. The grain store was a black pile. The barn stood. The house stood. Calvin Reeves arrived at 5 in the morning, having seen the light from his place. Behind him came the Hanson couple from the West Road, a young woman named Lily from Gertie's store, and Reverend Marsh walking from the church. "We saw the fire from town. What do you need?" This was the Wyoming way. You came when there was a fire. You didn't wait to be asked. They cleared ash and brought food and stood in the cold morning. And Tom looked around at their faces and understood that something needed to be said that should have been said sooner. "There is something you should all know," he said. "She is not my cousin." The yard went quiet. "Her name is Sarah Whitcomb. She came here by a wrong turn and stayed by her own choice. Someone from back east did this last night because they want her gone. I am asking you, as my neighbors and as people I trust, to know who she is to me." He took Sarah's hand in front of all of them. He didn't look to see if she was ready. He knew. She did not pull back. "And I am asking for your help." Gertie Hollis spoke first in the tone she used when the matter was settled. "Any woman from Boston who can fight a barn fire at 2 in the morning in a Wyoming winter without breaking down deserves to be here." Reverend Marsh gave a single solid nod. Calvin Reeves, one word, clear as always. "Say it." The community dispersed after the cleanup. Marsh stayed last. "Pierce will look for something he can use in court," the Reverend said quietly. "He doesn't have it yet, but he'll look." He glanced between them. "There is a way to close that particular door. A legal way. A simple one." He left them standing on the burned ground. A thread of smoke still rising from one corner where the grain store had been. "Pierce will come back," Tom said. "We have options. We can run. California, new names, start over where nobody knows either of us. Or we stay and fight for this. Either way, together. If you want me with you." Sarah looked at the ash where the grain store had stood. Burned because of her. Because she was here. "I have been running my whole life," she said. "I am tired of it." "Then there is one more thing to do." "What?" "Get married. Legally. In front of the Reverend and the territorial court. So no one can ever say in any legal language available to them that you don't belong here." Sarah was quiet for a moment, looking at him. "Tom, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to." And there was the difference. Don't have to is the language of obligation. What he said next was something else entirely. "I want to." She stood in the ash and cold of an early Wyoming morning, her shoulder bruised and her hair still carrying the smell of smoke, and she nodded. 3 days after the fire, Reverend Marsh's church in Harlow Creek, Tuesday morning, because there was no reason to wait. Sarah wore her dark blue dress, the best thing she owned, brought from Boston. Not a wedding gown, hair pinned up, no flowers, no music, no ceremony beyond what was needed. Tom wore a white shirt and black vest, the one good set of clothes he kept for occasions that mattered. Present. Reverend Marsh, Calvin and Nora Reeves, Gertie Hollis, the Hanson couple. Sarah looked at herself in the small mirror in the church's back room before the service and thought that this was not the wedding she had imagined when she was young. Then she realized she had stopped imagining it more than 2 years ago. The imagining had carried too many things she wasn't ready to name. They had written their own vows because neither of them wanted borrowed ones. Tom said, "I don't have much to offer you. I have land that needs work, a house that needs mending, and a heart that has been broken long enough that I can't promise it works the way it used to. But I'll give you all of it, every piece. Every day I have." Sarah said, "I came here to escape something. I'm staying because I found something I didn't know I was looking for. I promise I won't make you smaller to fit me. And I won't make myself smaller to fit you. We grow together and each our own. Or we don't grow at all." When Marsh said the ceremony was complete, Tom looked at Sarah first, a question in his eyes. She gave the smallest nod. He kissed her lightly on the forehead. In the back pew, Gertie Hollis pressed a handkerchief to her face and pretended to cough. 3 weeks on from the wedding, a new grain store was going up, larger than the original. Calvin and Hanson came 2 weekends in a row and worked without being asked and without expecting pay. Sarah sat at the table with Tom going over the bank account and the debt schedule, a ledger open between them. She had worked out a payment proposal, total debt and monthly interest, and projected income from spring cattle sales laid out in clean columns, with a plan to present to Cage that would extend the deadline 6 months within the legal terms of the mortgage. Tom looked at the figures. "Where did you learn to do this?" "My father," she said. "He never taught me. But I sat and listened to him work for 20 years. People learn when they are allowed to listen, even when they are never officially included." The letter from Pierce's law firm arrived shortly after. Thin legal argument, but enough to cause trouble. A claim of harboring a female ward, and a document asserting the marriage was invalid due to coercion. Tom read it and passed it to Sarah. His jaw was set in the way it went when he was keeping himself level. She put the letter down, stood up, went to the bottom of her traveling trunk and opened a small tin box that Tom had never seen her open. Inside was a bundle of papers tied with brown cord. She spread them on the table in order. First, signed statements from 3 Boston witnesses regarding her brother-in-law's conduct toward her. Dated, notarized, complete. Second, a copy of the marriage contract between her father and Hayes, with her own handwritten notation pointing to the line reading Sarah E. Whitcomb, which bore no signature from Sarah. Only 2 men had signed it. A business transaction, not a marriage agreement. Third, her birth certificate from 1855. She was 26 years old. Full legal standing under federal and territorial statute. Fourth, a letter from a Boston attorney confirming that a marriage contract bearing no signature from the person it concerned was unenforceable in any federal court. Fifth, the marriage certificate from Harlow Creek, filed with the territorial court. Tom looked through each page without speaking. "How long have you been preparing for this?" he said finally. "Since the night I heard my father and Hayes talking through the parlor door, 8 months before I left." "You knew someone would come." "I knew someone would come. I just didn't know when, and I didn't know if I would have anyone standing with me." A silence. "You always would have been all right," he said. "Even if I hadn't opened that door. Maybe. But being all right isn't the same as what I'm building here." He looked at her for a long moment. And what he saw was not the woman who had knocked on his door in a blizzard needing help. He saw someone who had been carrying this carefully and alone for the better part of a year, who had walked into his life fully prepared for every legal attack that was coming, and had not said a word about it because she hadn't needed to until now. He had not rescued her. She had been ready to rescue herself. What he had given her was something different, a place to come home to, and that, it turned out, was not a small thing at all. The legal case against them collapsed within a month. Pierce's arguments had no ground to stand on. The marriage contract without Sarah's signature was indefensible. Cornelius Whitcomb, faced with the documentation of his son-in-law's behavior and the reality of a legally valid marriage, went quiet. Pierce did not come back. A morning in March, snow going off the ground, earth brown and wet and ready. Breakfast, 2 cups on the table, not from old habit now, from the new one. Sarah looked out the window at the March light, wider and warmer than the winter had been. "I want to plant something. Not vegetables this season, something that lasts." "What did you have in mind?" She looked at him. "An apple orchard, behind the house, next to the birch tree." She had not spoken about that spot before. She mentioned it now because she thought Caroline would have liked it. Tom was quiet for a moment. "Apple trees take 7 years to bear fruit." "I know. I plan to be here in 7 years." "So do I." They went outside after breakfast with shovels and a small packet of seeds Sarah had ordered from Gertie's store 2 weeks earlier without telling anyone why. The first soil turned under a March sun, cold earth opening up after a long winter, the smell of something about to begin. Autumn of 1882, their second fall together on the Wheeler Ranch. The new grain store stood larger than the original, 12 more head of cattle in the pasture, the fences freshly maintained. Behind the house, near the birch tree, 8 small apple trees stood knee-high in the October light. 6 more years before they would produce anything worth speaking of. But they were standing. Sarah was working the last of the kitchen garden harvest one morning, moving slowly and deliberately in the way she had been moving for about 3 months now, one hand resting occasionally on her stomach in a gesture so natural she barely noticed she was doing it. Tom was at the far end of the south field, and he had been standing there looking toward the house for longer than any task required. There are moments when a person realizes they are happy, not perfectly happy. Some mornings were still heavy. The pale blue shawl still hung behind the front door. The small shoes were still beside the entryway, and Tom was not yet ready to move them. But happy enough to keep going. Happy enough to want to keep going. For Tom Wheeler, after everything, that was more than enough. That afternoon, a young rider came in from the main road, horse-tired, clothes road-worn. Tom was on the porch. The young man pulled off his hat. "Mr. Wheeler, I'm looking for my sister, Sarah Whitcomb. Sarah Wheeler now, I think." Tom looked at him for a moment. "James?" "Yes, sir." "Come inside." He went to get Sarah. She came to the door and saw her brother standing in the yard in the afternoon light. She stood still for 3 seconds, long enough for him to start to look worried. Then she came down the porch steps and put her arms around him. No rushing, No dramatic words, just two people who had been apart for 14 months standing in the yard, letting the silence say the things that language would have made smaller. Tom turned around and found something to do at the far fence, a task that was not necessary, but necessary in another way. He had learned over the past year how to give people room without leaving. After supper, James told it straight, the way you tell hard news when you have been carrying it a long distance, and there is no point in dressing it up anymore. Their father had passed in July. Fast, the doctor said, and not much pain. Their mother had been declining since summer. No certain timeline, but the doctor was not optimistic about winter. "Mother wants to see you," James said, not quite meeting Sarah's eyes. "She says she was wrong. She wants you to know that before—" He stopped. Tom looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at her own hands. The question hung in the air between all three of them. Tom said nothing. He had learned, too, that not every space needed to be filled with his voice. "I'll go," Sarah said finally. "A few weeks, and then I'll come home." James nodded with visible relief. He looked at Tom. "Thank you for looking after my sister." "She looks after herself," Tom said. "I'm just nearby." Sarah looked at him when he said that, said nothing. But some things don't need words. "Home is here," she told James when he asked if she might be persuaded to stay longer in Boston. "Boston is a place I have to visit one more time. Home is here." Tom said the word quietly to himself once, not as a question, not checking, just hearing it again. Home. Some words are worth the second hearing. The night before Sarah left for Boston, James was asleep in the loft, and the house was quiet. Tom and Sarah sat by the fire, closer than they needed to be for the sake of warmth. Outside, the first light snow of the season was coming down in small, uncertain flakes, not sure yet if they were going to stay. "I have something for you to take with you," Tom said. He handed her an envelope, unsealed, no address on the outside. "Whose is this?" she asked. "Mine, to Caroline." She held it and looked at it. "I wrote it 3 years ago after they were gone," he said. "I couldn't burn it. I wasn't ready. I couldn't send it anywhere that meant anything. It's been under the floorboard with the rest." "Tom, I can't—" "You can. And I'd like you to." He looked at her directly. "There is a line in that letter where I forgave myself for staying, for continuing to live after they left. For 3 years I could not read that line without feeling like I was betraying them. And now? Now I understand that forgiving yourself for surviving is not the same as forgetting the people you have lost. It means allowing both things to exist at the same time. They are there. I am here. One does not cancel the other." A short silence between them, the good kind. "I want you to carry it," he said, "not necessarily to read it unless you want to, just so you know. You did not save me. I had already decided to keep living before you knocked on that door. You gave the decision a reason worth having." Sarah took the envelope. She placed it inside her coat, close. "I'll come back," she said. "I know. You won't worry." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but closer to one than she had seen from him in all the months before she arrived, and closer to one than most things deserved from a man who had learned to spend his feelings carefully. "I'll worry," he said, "but I'll work while I worry. That's how things keep going." She reached over and took his hand, and they sat like that in front of the fire for a while, listening to the snow settle outside and the house settle around them, and neither of them said anything else because nothing else needed to be said. Sarah Wheeler left Harlow Creek on an October morning with her brown leather bag and an unsealed envelope inside her coat. 3 weeks later, she came back. She brought nothing from Boston. She had signed her inheritance over to James to give him a start. She had sat beside her mother until the end, and she had said the true things that needed to be said, and she had received the apology her mother offered, and she had forgiven it. Not because she was asked to, but because carrying the weight of it would cost more than setting it down. That was something the past year had taught her. She brought only herself back. The woman who had come to Wyoming because there was no other direction left. Who had stayed because it was the first time in her life she had been free to choose. who had left and returned because this was home, and she knew it now the way she knew her own name. Tom was standing at the gate when the stage stopped. No flowers, no speech. He was just there, the way he was always just there, in the patient, unhurried way of a man who had learned that the best thing he could do for the people he loved was to keep showing up. They looked at each other across the width of the yard. Then she stepped down from the stage and walked to him. And that was the whole of it. Behind the house, 8 small apple trees stood in the autumn wind. 6 more years before they would bear anything. Beside them, under the birch tree, 2 names carved in weathered wood, Caroline, Mary. And next to them, newer carving in a different hand, not a name, a year, 1882. The year nothing started over. The year everything continued. Some love stories begin with a glance across a room. Some begin with a letter, a promise, a perfect afternoon. This one began with a wagon stopping at the wrong station, and a man who opened his door not from kindness, but because it was the right thing to do. And he still knew the difference, even after 3 years of trying not to care about that. And when a woman stood in his barn and said, "You deserve better than me," he froze. Not because he didn't know what to say, because those words landed on the exact place inside him where he had been saying the same thing to himself for 3 years, pointed in the opposite direction. He had told himself he deserved nothing more. She was standing there telling him he deserved something better than her. And both of them were wrong in the same way for the same reason. They had both forgotten that deserving something is not the point. The point is choosing it. And he chose her, not because she needed him, because he wanted to. That difference, the distance between those 2 things, is the whole of the story. And the apple trees grew. This book is a work of imagination. Names, characters, places, and incidents either are products of the author's creativity or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to real persons or actual events is unintentional and should not be construed as factual representation.
Before we close the final page on Sarah and Tom, I want to sit with you here for just a moment longer, because this story was never really about Wyoming. It was never about a blizzard or a wrong stop on a stage route or even a ranch that needed saving. Those were just the circumstances. The real story was happening underneath all of that, in the quiet spaces between 2 people who had both been told, in different ways, that they did not deserve anything more than what they already had. Sarah spent 26 years being treated like something to be arranged rather than someone to be known. Her father signed her name on a contract without asking her opinion. The people around her looked right through her knowledge, her intelligence, her carefully kept records, as if none of it existed. She was properly dressed in a woman's clothing, and the most painful part was that no one in her own family seemed to notice the difference. Tom spent 3 years punishing himself for surviving, for still being alive when Caroline and Mary were not. He kept 2 cups on the table every morning, not out of habit, but out of a grief so deep it had become the only language he knew. He had quietly decided, somewhere in those long Wyoming winters, that he had no right to want anything good ever again. And here is what this story teaches us. It teaches us that the cruelest damage done to a person is not always loud. It does not always come with raised voices or obvious cruelty. Sometimes it comes softly, through years of being overlooked, through being spoken about in the same room as if you were not there, through the slow, steady message that your wants and your wisdom and your worth simply do not count. And it teaches us that healing from that kind of damage is not a single moment. It is a series of small ones. A shovel handed over without a word, a blanket laid across a shoulder, a question asked for the first time in 26 years. Someone saying, "I am listening," and meaning it completely. This story also teaches us something about what love actually is, at its most honest. It is not rescue. Tom did not rescue Sarah. She had already rescued herself, carefully, quietly, over 8 months, with documents in a tin box and knowledge in her hands that no one had ever thought to ask about. What Tom gave her was something different. He gave her a place where her worth was not something she had to prove, a place where the question, "What do you know?" was finally asked, a place she could call home not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she had chosen it freely. And that is the deepest truth this story carries. Choosing something freely, not from fear, not from obligation, not because every other door has been closed, but simply because you want it, because it is good and true and yours. That is one of the most powerful things a human being can do. Sarah chose to stay. Tom chose her after hearing every reason not to, and the apple trees grew. That is the whole of it.